Good evening, everyone. My name is Krisy, and I would like to welcome you to the Doylestown Bookshops virtual event series. We are thrilled to welcome back bestselling and award-winning author Jillian Cantor as we discuss her new book, Beautiful Little Fools, which I have right here with me. We will be in conversation for about 30 minutes. Following that, we will take questions from you, the viewers. If you would like to submit a question, click on Ask a Question on your screen and submit your questions there. If you're watching from a phone or tablet, click the icon with the question mark. If you would like to purchase Beautiful Little Fools from the Doylestown or Lahaska Bookshops, click the button on your screen that says Buy the Books. This book is available in hardcover and paperback right now. Now, a little bit about Jillian. Jillian Cantor is the author of award winning and best selling novels for adults and teens, including In Another Time, The Hours Count, Margot, and The Lost Letter, and of course, now Beautiful Little Fools. The Lost Letter was a USA Today bestseller. She has a BA in English from Penn State University and an MFA from the University of Arizona. Jillian, it is so nice to be with you tonight to talk about your wonderful new book, Beautiful Little Fools.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So happy to have you back. And I have to tell you, Glenda was so sorry not to make it. I wanted to tell you, as a bookstore, we receive so many galleys. When she saw this galley in our office, she was the first to grab it. We couldn't even get
Oh,
our hands on it. She she loved Another Time, Hours Count, Lost Letters. She's such a huge fan. She's so sorry she couldn't make it. The cover is stunning. The
yeah.
cover's gorgeous, and we all know how important the covers of books can be. Were you happy with the art design for this cover?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I love the cover. I'm going to hold it up again because it is beautiful. And I had nothing to do with it. People keep telling me that I did a great job with the cover. It has had absolutely nothing to do with me. It was the art department at my publisher, but they did an amazing job with it. Um, that was actually the first cover that they showed me. I don't know if they had other concepts or not, but that was the first one that they showed me. And, I loved it. And I don't think it changed at all since the initial time I first saw it. And, that's kind
Oh,
of rare. A
wow.
lot of times they'll send a few options and people kind of have different opinions, but this was it. They sent it
Oh, wow.
and it's still there. And it's great. I agree.
So, our viewers may not know this book, if you're a fan of The Great Gatsby, this book is for you. It's an imagining of some of the characters pre-Gatsby, I could say. Um, I'd like to know what drew you to write a book about the women of The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, so Beautiful Little Fools is kind of like a reimagining of the world of the Great Gatsby, but like you said, it takes place before. It also does take place during and after the Great Gatsby. So it's before, during, and after the original. It's from the women's points of view, and it's sort of like part retelling, part historical novel about women, and part murder mystery because there's a detective who's investigating Jay Gatsby's death, and he suspects one of three women, and that's how the story unfolds. So I've always been a huge fan of The Great Gatsby since I read it for the first time in high school. And then, I read it again in college. I actually still have my college copy on my desk right now. And I kept it, moved it
Wow.
across the country with me. And it was just a book that I would come back to reread every year or two. And I don't reread a lot of books. I usually read it once and I'm done. But The Great Gatsby, I always came back to. And I think at first I was really drawn to it as a reader. I love the picture of the roaring 20s. There's so much going on. There's like glamour and affairs and murder. But then I also really love it as a writer. It's a short book, but it's very beautifully written. And I always was fascinated by the choice that F. Scott Fitzgerald made to narrate it from Nick's point of view. Nick is this outsider, to the group. And I always felt that really shaped the story and made it unique from a lot of other books, a lot of other classic books. But every time I read it, I would think a lot about the women. The women are very central to the plot of The Great Gatsby. Everything revolves around the women, but they barely speak in the original novel. We definitely don't know how they're feeling or what they're thinking. And so I would always kind of wonder about them and want to know more. And I think, eventually I wrote this book because it was just a book that I wanted to read. So I decided I had to write it.
Was it a challenge writing a book that's based on another book?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely different than anything I had ever done, and I went about it differently. People always ask writers if you're a plotter or a pantser, and I always say I'm a pantser, which means that I don't outline. I just sort of like do the first draft by the seat of my pants, and that's how I always write. But with Beautiful Little Fools, I was a plotter. I made a very detailed outline before I started, and it was because I took so many details from The Great Gatsby, and I took the timeline that F. Scott Fitzgerald set up for these characters. The original Gatsby only takes place over 3 months in the summer of 1922, but we get little bits and pieces of what the characters were doing from 1917 on. So I sort of mapped out, where everyone was, what they were doing. There's a bunch of quotes and sort of scenes from the original that get mixed in. So I made a really big detailed outline before I started. So I had to approach it differently because there was this, initial text that I was sort of drawing from to write my story.
And my next question was, how closely did you try to follow Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby? So yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, my book takes place between 1917 and 1923, and The Great Gatsby is just the summer of 1922. But everywhere that my characters go, Daisy and Tom move around a lot. They go to the South Pacific on their honeymoon. They go to Santa Barbara on their honeymoon. They move to France. They move to Chicago. Then they move to East Egg. I mean, all of that was mentioned in The Great Gatsby. So you see my characters, what they're actually doing in those places and what they're thinking and feeling. But I did, draw that timeline from the original. But I also think, I thought a lot about point of view as I was writing this book. And I always think about that in all of my books. I think that's what I'm always drawn to as a writer, thinking about how who's telling the story changes the story. And that, there can be two people who watch the same events unfold and see them completely differently. And this was just really a big exercise in that for me. A lot of how Nick sees the events are not how Daisy and Jordan see them at all. So I think even though I'm showing you some of the same events, they come across very differently. And I think the biggest example is the character of Jay Gatsby himself. Nick loves Jay Gatsby and in the original book. He's very enamored with him. He has these like rose-colored Jay Gatsby glasses on. He thinks that, everything Jay is doing is this like grand romantic gesture for Daisy. But thinking about it from Daisy's point of view and just, as a woman, I thought about the fact that Daisy and her husband move into this new house in East Egg, and then Jay Gatsby moves across the sound from her. This guy that she broke up with 5 years earlier, like moves across the sound so he can basically stare in her backyard. And
It's a little stalky, Jay.
yeah,
It's a
I
little.
was like, well, I think Daisy might feel uncomfortable about this. And so even though it's like the same things are happening that summer, Daisy is not interpreting them the same way that Nick portrayed them.
Interesting. So I'm not all the way through it, but what I've read so far, Beautiful Little Fools almost reads like a mystery and a love story. What was your writing process like when you dove into this?
It definitely is a mystery. There's a detective who has little interludes throughout who's investigating the murder of Jay Gatsby, and he finds a diamond hairpin in the bushes by Jay Gatsby's pool, and he suspects one of these three women who all have a connection to this hairpin and to Jay Gatsby. And then, I don't know that I would say it's a love story as much as I would say it's about sort of like female friendship and sisterhood. There are a lot of sets of sisters in my book. One of the main characters is Myrtle Wilson's sister, Catherine, who's briefly mentioned in The Great Gatsby. She has two small scenes, but she's one of my main characters. And then Daisy in my novel has a sister, Rose, who's a central figure. And then Jordan and Daisy have this very much like, sister-like relationship. So I would say it's more of like a love story in terms of like the female friendship, like female empowerment angle. But the writing process, I very much drew on things we learn in the original book that aren't explored. there's a lot of just like lines of dialogue here and there where people say things that I sort of thought about a lot. And, one example is in the original novel, they're all in the plaza near the end of the book. They're all drinking. It's very hot. And they start talking about Daisy and Tom's wedding. And all of a sudden, Jordan brings up the fact that someone fainted at the wedding and that they carried this man down to her house because she lived nearby. And then she says something like, he stayed for 3 weeks until Daddy kicked him out, and then Daddy died the next day. And then they move on with their conversation. So it's not like it's not a big part of The Great Gatsby, but that line actually becomes a pretty central plot point for Jordan in my book. You get to see what happened with this guy, why her father kicked him out. I go into her relationship with her father a lot and his death. And that was sort of like a character building thing for me. So my writing process, I think, was finding those little tidbits like that in the original Great Gatsby, and then figuring out what they meant for my novel, my characters.
Mm-hmm. And you wrote the book using women's alternating voices. Had you planned on writing it that way from the beginning, or did it kind of evolve into that?
I did. I think like my initial idea for the book, I was just going to make a Daisy story. But that lasted like a few days. And then I realized, no, I had more that I wanted to do than Daisy's story. So the detailed outline that I mentioned earlier, that was pretty close to what you see in the final book, actually. So I had the 3 women, I had the detective, I did like a chapter by chapter outline, and I stuck to it. And I actually turned the first draft into my editor, and she read it, and she said that I forgot the last chapter. And I argued with her, and I was like, no, this is the last chapter of my outline. And she was like, no, that can't be the last chapter. So I had to sort of like think about what she was saying and realize she was right. And then the last chapter in the book did not actually exist in the outline or in that first draft, but everything else in the book was in my outline. So I think I knew pretty early on what I was trying to do, which is rare for me. That does not normally happen. It probably will never happen again.
How did you research this book? And when you're doing that, was there anything that surprised you that was new, or anything that you discovered during your research?
I think, most of my research was rereading The Great Gatsby and analyzing every word in it, multiple times. But I did do some other little stuff just because, I knew that they were in Santa Barbara, in 1919, but I did a little research into what hotel they might have been staying in and what things looked like. And, obviously what clothes people were wearing, or, when she was she grew up in Louisville. And so I did some research into like, okay, well, what neighborhood would she live in, and what would her house look like, and what street would she live on, and, where would she go? So little stuff like that. And I have to say, one sort of research rabbit hole that I fell down that I didn't expect was the pandemic of 1918 and 1919. I actually started writing this book before our pandemic. So like January 2020, I had the first 50 pages and that outline done, and I sold it to my editor just on that much. And, then I had to write the rest. And so the rest I wrote during the pandemic. I actually didn't come back to it until like April 2020. So I wrote most of the book in like April, May, and June. And when I came back to it in April, I think I was in 1918, and I realized, wait, I have to get the pandemic in this book. Like, there was a pandemic. This has to be in this book. And so I think I spent like a week researching the pandemic and realizing that there were all these different waves, and none of them coincided with the months and weeks when my book was taking place, like in those particular years, and they were in Louisville, and like the month I was showing, things were pretty normal in Louisville at that time. So I charted out the whole pandemic and like when it was bad and where it was bad. And I did eventually end up with one line in my book about the pandemic. And Jordan talks about the fact that some of her golf tournaments get delayed because of it. But yeah, that was something I didn't expect to go down when I first started writing the book, for sure. I did not know I was going to be writing in a pandemic at that point.
Right. And you added a character into Beautiful Little Fools that wasn't in The Great Gatsby, the character of Frank Charles. How did he come about?
So Frank Charles is the detective who's investigating Gatsby's murder, and he's totally my creation. And I knew I wanted it to be a murder mystery. I knew I wanted there to be a detective, and I wanted to make him a nice guy to sort of balance out Tom Buchanan and Jay Gatsby, who are not very nice. We know that from the original. So the detective actually is very nice. He has a very nice wife who he does everything for and who he listens to. He really takes her advice. So I like him. He just has a few short chapters, but I like him for the balance that he provides. And like all men were not bad in this time. It was there were nice men too. I don't think they were in Tom Buchanan's circle, but Detective Charles is not in Tom Buchanan's circle.
Were there times when you got stuck in the writing and you just weren't sure how to move forward in the story?
No, because I have my outline. That does happen to me
That's
when I'm
right.
writing other books. But this time, no. I mean, I stuck to my outline, and it was extremely fun to write every day. It was a really good escape during the beginning of the pandemic when I wasn't leaving the house and I wasn't doing anything. It was just like a really fun escape, and I knew what was happening next, and I knew where my characters were going, and it was very reassuring at the time.
The benefits of being a plotter.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I wish I could become a plotter. I have not. I will tell you that I finished writing my next book recently, and it was not plotted at all. As much as I wanted to, I did not.
Right. So as I'm going through your book, I am so enjoying like reading this imagining of the lives of the women before Jay Gatsby entered their lives and reading their backstory and the points of view. It's really, really fascinating. So much so that as soon as I'm done this, I'm going to have to reread The Great Gatsby again. I like to read it. It is my favorite. Like every 2 years. I
Mm-hmm.
love it so much. And I still find myself finding little things that I didn't notice before. It's perfect. Um, and I found myself just re-immersing myself into the world. I'm watching the Robert Redford Mia Farrow movie. Did you find yourself completely immersed in this world while you were writing this?
Yeah, I definitely did. I mean, part of it was that it was the pandemic, so I wasn't immersed in any other world because I never left my house. But I did,
Right.
I reread the book so many times, and just like you said, noticed things I had never noticed before, like, little lines where I thought like, oh, what does that mean? And that needs to go into my book. And I did watch all of the movies. There is one where Paul Rudd is Nick that I could only find on DVD. It's not streaming, so I had to like order that from like a used
I've never
DVD
seen that
site.
one.
Yeah, it was really good actually. That might be my favorite.
Oh,
That might have been my
I'll
favorite.
I'll have to look
But it was
that
also
up.
really interesting to notice like how even the movies, which are just a representation of the original book, are all different in their own way, and just seeing the way
Hmm.
like the director's point of view and the actors like point of view sort of changed the gaze even slightly, and the women are all slightly different in each of the movies,
Hmm.
which is interesting. So I was completely immersed in it. And I reread the book, I think, twice before I started writing, and I was doing my outline. And then I reread it again after I did my first draft for other details that I missed. And then I think I reread it a fourth time when I was like in the editing stage, maybe even a fifth time.
Wow. It's just, it's good every time. It's good every single time. It's
It is. That
amazing.
is true.
I love
I have
it.
to say, I have not reread it since I finished Beautiful Little Fools. But it's now that we're talking, it's like,
That's
oh, I
fair.
haven't reread it in about a year. I think I need to reread it.
That's fair. You did a lot. You did a lot in this world. It's good to take a break. So when writing these women in your book, was there one in particular that you found most interesting to write, or were they all equally interesting for you?
I mean, I loved writing all of them, but I think my favorite character ended up being Jordan.
Hmm.
Jordan is just so tough, but she has this like real vulnerability underneath everything too. So I was always extra excited when I got to write Jordan.
I'm not going to spoil, but I like what you do with Jordan. I'll just say that I really like
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
do with her.
Jordan was extremely fun to write.
hmm and I do want to remind everyone who's watching, if you would like to submit a question for Jillian, now is the time. Click the button on your screen that says Ask a Question. You can type it in there. You don't have to be on camera. You don't have to be on audio. I'll ask the question. Easy peasy. Were there any other characters that you enjoyed writing about in
I mean,
addition to?
I truly enjoyed writing all of them. I've never had as much fun writing a book as I had writing this one. It was just like such a joy to work on it every day. And I think, like I said earlier, I wrote the book that I always wanted to read because I always wanted to know more about the women. So I got to make it up. So it was truly fun to do. Um, I don't think there was ever a day where I was, unhappy to be writing in anyone's point of view. Like, honestly, I loved doing all of it.
That's amazing. I can't imagine the experience is always like that.
It's not, no.
All right. I did want to ask you, did you happen to read the book? It's titled Nick by Michael Ferris Smith. Um, it's something similar to what your book does, where it looks at Nick Carraway's character.
Yeah, I have not read it yet. I know it's I think it's Nick's story before The Great Gatsby, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I haven't read it. I know exactly what you're talking about. I have not read any of the other Gatsby retellings yet, but I am going to. There's another one, I think it's called The Chosen and the Beautiful. Also, it's about
Oh.
Jordan and Daisy, but I think it's like a fantasy retelling of it. So I want to read that one too, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I read Nick over the summer and I was hesitant, but it was very good. It was very good. All right, we have a question from Anne, and she says, I can understand how this title emerged from Daisy's remark about her daughter. How do you come up with titles for your other books?
Yeah, so this title, and I'll just say in case other people are listening and don't know about the quote, but Beautiful Little Fools does come from a quote, like you said, that Daisy says about her daughter. And in the original Great Gatsby, she tells her cousin Nick that when she was having her baby, she hoped it would be a boy. And then when they tell her it's a girl, she says, well, I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. So I love that line in the original novel. It's always been one of my favorites. And when I knew that I was going to write about the women of the Great Gatsby, the first thing I knew was the title. And I said, it's going to be called Beautiful Little Fools. So I started with that. That never happens to me. Normally, I don't have a title and I'm writing the first draft. And often my agent reads it and she's like, how about this for a title? And I'm like, okay, that sounds good to me because I always struggle with titles. And then often the title will get changed. Once the book's edited, the sales and marketing team will want to change it. But Beautiful Little Fools was the rare instance where the title came first and where it stayed throughout the process. So actually, my next book, which is going to be out in 2023, but like details haven't really been announced about it yet, so I can't talk about it that much. But I had two different titles on it when I was working on it, and then my agent read it and she was like, I don't like either one of these titles, like how about this title? And I said, great. And I think that's what the title is going to be at this point. But that's usually how it happens. I'm terrible with titles for the most part.
It was really the perfect title. When I saw the galley, I was like, Beautiful Little Fools.
I have to even say, like, The Lost Letter, which is one of my earlier novels, which some of you might have read. I think we were all fighting about the title, like up until the cover was about to be printed. Like it went through so many titles and then no one could agree on what the title was. And then I think finally someone was like, how about The Lost Letter? And we were all like, fine, that's fine.
Fine.
But now I can't imagine it as any other title. It's been out since 2017 and I don't know. Now it feels like The Lost Letter. Like, of course that's the title.
Oh my God. I was going to ask you if you could tell us anything about your new book, but I know you can't, so it's all right.
I mean, I can just say a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit, and then more details are going to be coming in the next few weeks, and I'll post about it.
Okay.
but it's about a writer who gets hired by a handsome billionaire to ghostwrite his family story. And his family has a connection to Daphne du Maurier and Rebecca. So it delves into that a little bit. But yeah, more details coming soon for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for giving us that little tidbit. If anyone has any other questions, this is the time to submit them. I really do like to ask all of the authors we do virtual events with what they're currently reading. So, what are you currently reading?
I actually just finished a book called The Roughest Draft. And I don't know if you've read that one, but it's written by a husband and wife, and it's about two writers who co-write together. It was really cute, like light romantic comedy. I read that over the weekend. And in historical fiction, I just read The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis, which I love all of her books. You know, she always writes about like historical landmarks in New York. This one's about the Frick House, and she has this great like balance between true historical stuff and fictional women. And then I also just read The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkoff, which is she writes these like great atmospheric thriller set in Iowa, you know, in the winter. It's always, and there was actually winter and summer in this book. Lots of temperature extremes, very atmospheric thriller. Oh, and the Liz Taylor Ring by Brenda Janowitz, which came out the same day as Beautiful Little Fools. I got to read that a little bit early, but that is a great story about like siblings, and they have this a family heirloom ring. There's sort of like a mystery of what happened to it. But I love books about like grown siblings and family dynamics, and that was a great one.
I haven't read that yet. I love Brenda. She's fantastic.
Yeah, it was really good. I loved it.
I'm of course finishing Beautiful Little Fools, and I have a galley of The Lioness, which is Chris Jillian's new book
Oh
that I'm
yeah, that
looking
looks
forward
good.
to
That is a great
diving
cover too.
into. Oh my gosh, he's coming in May, so I want to get it read. I want to get it read before he comes for his event. All right, we have another question from Anne. Um, Jillian, what do you use as your inspiration for what you're about to write?
You know, I wish there was just like one easy answer to that question. I don't know. It's different things. It's usually something that just fascinates or inspires me, or something that I want to explore. And I know whatever book I'm going to write, it's something I'm going to spend a year or two of my life thinking and talking and writing about. So it definitely has to be something that I feel passionate about. You know, in the case of Beautiful Little Fools, like I said, I sort of wrote the book I always wanted to read. I wanted to know more about the women, so I decided I had to figure out more about the women. But I've written, you know, about historical women. My last book was about Marie Curie. Um, it really just has to be something that piques my interest. And that's always the hardest thing for me to sort of decide what to do next. You know, I have a lot of ideas and I make a lot of false starts with them, but it has to just like feel right and, you know, feel like something that I really can spend that amount of time with before I get going. And I'm sort of in that stage now where I am trying to figure out, you know, what I'm going to write my next book on. And so I'm not sure. I wish I could just press a button and someone would tell me.
Oh my gosh. Well, we'll look forward to your next book, but we have to dive into this one first and finish this one first. And thank you for writing this. Just as a Gatsby fan,
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate, I love diving back into the world and seeing what you've imagined for it. It's so, so good. So if you haven't picked it up yet, you can click the button on the screen that says click here to buy the book, and it takes you to our website where you can choose the hardcover or paperback, both of which we have in our stores. I don't see any more questions, so Jillian, I think we're going to wrap it up. I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this wonderful book, and I hope that we can do something in person for your next one, but we'll
Yeah,
see
I
how
hope
it
so
goes.
too. Thank you so much for having me again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a good night. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.